Okay, Paul, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks to everyone for coming along. This is going to be quite an informal book launch, in the sense that really what this is about is giving the authors a chance to speak, rather than me giving any kind of lengthy talk. But what I'll do is I'll just set the context of this, how the book came about and how it evolved. It was quite a long process, which I'm sure Michèle can also testify to, and all of our authors. So this is a picture of the book itself: social justice in EAP and ELT contexts, and global higher education perspectives. And it has been a couple of years in terms of the journey from the original concept of doing this to getting the finished product. So it's been very enjoyable, and we've worked with a fantastic team of authors, I have to say. And I would certainly recommend it in the future, and to anyone thinking of going down the road of publishing. So Michèle's also in the audience today, I see. So we were co-editors of this project, which began in terms of the concept around November, December 2021. We put out a call for chapters. At the time, I was working for the University of Westminster. Then I moved to UCL, where I am now. And basically, the book was very much influenced by our worldview, both myself and Michèle. We're both very passionate advocates of a great many causes in the world of social justice. And one of the features of this book is that, in terms of the theoretical framework, we don't want social justice to be a kind of superficial, cosmetic layer on top of the work that we do. We want to see social justice kind of as the underlying foundation of everything that we do, because, as EAP and ELT educators, we are in a very unique position in terms of our awareness of internationalization, and even in terms of the political nature of what we do. And certainly so much of the work that we do or have done resonates with many of the values that universities espouse at the present time. And of course, this is discussed in the book, whether or not they actually put those into practice, and whether or not whether there is a disparity in espoused practice and actual practice. But again, that's maybe a matter that you can find out more about if you read the book. So in this work, we have brought in a range of voices. Several of the authors are very new to publishing, and some of them have actually used this as a platform for going on then and doing other things. I mean, just this morning, my manager in UCL sent me an email about an EAP event that's taking place in Berlin in June. And I thought that looks interesting. And then I looked at it, and the plenary talk is being given by one of the authors in the book, Katie Mansfield, who was writing about running courses in Westminster University, pre-sessional courses, where she integrated a social justice aspect. So it's really, really good to see that this book has given a platform for that kind of work, because in that particular chapter, for example, Katie was talking about teachers in precarious positions, and it was a chapter that was co-authored with the group of part-time or hourly paid lecturers. And again, through this, they've also gone on to do other things. So we also wanted to bring in a lot of voices on the intersection. So the whole idea of intersectional identities is one, again, that's very often talked about in universities of the present time. And so we have a range of voices here. And again, I think when Tomasz and Lorraine and Yvonne, for example, speak about their chapter, you will see how, people bring in different parts of their life experiences and their professional experiences and so on, and all these kind of synthesized together to make us the people and the teachers and the activists that we are. So, we have voices from all over the world, in different contexts. So, Syria, Afghanistan, Mexico, even South America. And a lot of these voices also challenge and question and constructively criticize. For example, there's a chapter by Magda Rostron, who is writing about the Qatari context and the idea of discussing social justice issues with a group of female Muslim students and the particular challenges in that context. And again, in terms of the idea of criticism and constructive criticism, that again echoes a lot of the work on critical EAP, which Natalia and Kashmir, two of our authors, co-wrote about. And critical EAP, when the work of Sarah Benesh features very heavily in a lot of the other chapters as well. So there are instances of practice, as I've said, across continents and contexts, and it's very, very diverse in that it goes from Mexico to Finland, where Avril Bolster talks about her work in terms of designing an EAP course, which I think many of you will have come across in your work. And so today we're going to have a group of authors. Sorry, I like my animations, but we're going to hear about the stories and the practice and the context talked about in 4 chapters. And as I say, we were waiting on Alex to come. So I'll just check to see if he's here. But I think one of the things that we want to see today is we want to make this as interactive as possible. So it would be great as well if when anyone is talking that, you can pop some questions in the chat as well, and then we can move on to those in the discussion stage. So as I've said, this book is very much a story of people's practices throughout the world. That's why we've got a very global themed cover, which Michèle and I picked from a selection offered by Bloomsbury. So, there's a lot of theory in the book, but I think the stories that will resonate most with people are those practical stories. And we're going to hear 4 of those stories now. So I'll just check and see if Alex has joined us. Okay, so is Alex with us? No. Well, maybe we'll start with Yvonne then. That's all right, Yvonne?
Yeah, absolutely fine. Thanks, Paul. So my name's Yvonne. I work at the Institute of Ismaili Studies, mostly on online preparatory and pre-sessional programs and some in-sessional programs. I'd like to talk briefly about my motivations for writing the chapter. It's entitled English for Academic Purposes in Fragile Contexts, and I'll give you a brief overview. So I have had several motivations for researching and writing on this subject. Firstly, I've worked in the field of ELT and EAP for over 25 years in a number of challenging and sometimes dangerous environments. I worked with underprivileged Egyptians at Al-Azhar University. I've worked with Syrian teachers and undergraduates in refugee camps and host communities in Jordan. And I managed development programs for heads of English departments at universities across Libya. Now, the programs that I work on for the Institute of Ismaili Studies are for students based mostly in Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, and Tajikistan. So a range of very interesting, fascinating contexts, but very, very challenging and fragile contexts. Furthermore, my research has showed the need for a much greater understanding of these students. They're very, very unique situations, and the students' needs are vital. It seems obvious to talk about needs analysis, but I think we need to go much, much further than that. Most of the research done in the area, I think, seems to focus on host communities and refugee camps rather than students still living in their own homes, in their own context, in these fragile environments. So that was something that I thought was really important to look into. My other motivation was a feeling that academic factors are the main focus of project design and implementation, and there needs to be much more of a focus on non-academic factors, which I feel can sometimes be neglected, and that can lead to maybe unnecessary stress for students who are already in very difficult situations. So those were my motivations for writing the chapter, and I'd just like to give you an overview now. So the focus is basically on examining the obstacles which prevent some of these students from being accepted onto master's programs in the UK and in other countries overseas. I looked at the academic factors. First of all, I looked at higher education in some of these countries, particularly Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, and Tajikistan, and looked at some possible reasons for low levels of English and academic skills. Some common themes and some very important differences behind this, and as I said before, I think that's vital to understand when planning programs for these students. I also looked at the non-academic factors which hinder student success. First of all, I looked at trauma-informed pedagogy, and I investigated the theory of do no harm. Excuse me. And as I said before, I think, it can be quite harmful not to investigate the students' backgrounds and contexts really, really carefully. I concluded that there's a great importance to specialised teacher training, not just normal teacher training, but very specialised teacher training for these students. For teachers teaching these students. Also project sustainability. I've worked on some projects where the project has been completed and then there's not been a follow-on. I think it's very important that there's a sustainable aspect to working with these students and with the teachers. And one way can be by creating communities of practice. I also looked at resilience, and when I talked about resilience, I talk about academic and emotional resilience. So academic resilience being access to educational and employment opportunities, which in turn benefit communities, and then emotional resilience, which I found particularly interesting and important. So ways of dealing with trauma through combining teaching with psychosocial support, becoming empowered and giving people a voice through language learning. And I've looked at some different examples of projects where I believe that's happened. So some really successful projects in Egypt and in Palestine, and with some of the Syrians that I've worked with in Jordan. I also considered motivation, engagement, and investment, interrelated themes, but I think are important to consider separately as well. And very important when students are studying online and sometimes from their own homes. In my experience, I've seen increased motivation and investment, but perhaps lower engagement, perhaps due to practical issues, nowhere quite to study, power cuts, internet connectivity, digital literacy. I've explored some of those themes, and again, that brings us back to a thorough needs analysis to see, the situations in countries, cities, villages, for the students individually. Finally, I looked at community and identity. So identity within a community, but then also looking at wider, excuse me, wider host communities and the importance of common language to foster feelings of safety, being accepted, and also classroom communities and how that can increase resilience and group solidarity. And that's something that I've seen in the courses that I run at the moment for the Institute of Ismaili Studies. It's wonderful to see how students from Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, all in difficult situations, can have their own online community and come to lessons earlier than they need to, and the teacher joins and they're already talking together. So that was a brief overview of my chapter. Happy to answer questions, or maybe we'll leave that to the end, and I'll...
Yeah, I think we can take questions at the end, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think Alex is here yet.
No, I don't think he is, Paul. Just to say that if anyone does have questions and wants to pop them in the chat as well, we will keep an eye on the chat. So if there are questions popping up for you from Yvonne's fabulous talk, then please do share them.
Yep.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Yeah, so thanks, Yvonne and Lorraine. Tomasz, I think you, in Alex's absence, would you like to speak?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to go next. I'm just going to share my screen with you. I've got a short presentation. You could let me know if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to give you an overview of the project and the book chapter that myself, Lorraine, and Yvonne wrote together. In the chapter titled, it's a very long title, Becoming Social Just Educators, a trio ethnographic study of exploring professional identity through dialogue, ethics of care, and creativity. I had to take 4 quick breaths, but hopefully I'll be able to unpack some of these keywords later in the presentation. So in this chapter, we explored the intricate world of professional identities in EAP through a social justice lens. And in this short presentation, I'll share some insights from our research and the process of writing of this book. And I'll focus on how social justice shaped our practices and identities within the field of EAP. So yeah, just a few reasons and justification for approaching this project, which I think was rooted in scholarly activism, I would say, where we kind of aimed for not only to understand, but also to actively promote socially just practices within higher education institutions where we all worked. So through our work in the SIG, we kind of strive to influence the wider educational landscape by creating spaces for learning outside the traditional structures and kind of fostering more inclusive and equitable environments. And the methodology we went for in our exploration, we kind of adopted the trio ethnographic methodology. So we all looked at our respective trajectories, where we kind of emphasized our ongoing dialogue as the cornerstone of our research process. And then it was very clear that the storytelling was emerging as the main powerful tool for reflection and sense making, where each of us shared personal narratives and reflections on our experiences within EAP. And that became sort of therapy, very therapeutic. And through journaling, dialogue, and sort of other creative activities, such as the blackout poetry, which I'm going to tell you in a moment, we kind of allowed ourselves to go deeply into our stories to kind of generate insights into our professional intersectional journeys. So these are just snippets of our blackout poems. So what we did, we transcribed our hours of meetings on Zoom, in person, and we decided that going and analyzing it through kind of traditional thematic analysis approach would be quite superficial. We wouldn't be able to see the complex layers there. So we came up with this idea of being a bit more playful with it. So we gave the blackout poetry a go, and we took the transcripts, and all of us looked at each other's transcripts, and we sort of reread the stories and paid attention to other hidden gems. And, you know, a new kind of realization of certain emerging themes became really apparent, and that allowed us to go even deeper into our reflections. So yeah, the research project kind of allowed us to reflect on our personal experiences within the realm of EAP, but also we went beyond that to kind of personal stuff. In my own story, in my own shared journey, I kind of navigated through the complexities of the English language industry and how it influenced my teaching practice. I kind of reflected on my complex relationship with the English language and the ELT industry in my career, viewing it both as a kind of savior but also as an oppressor sometimes. And I kind of explored my experiences of being treated as an English language ambassador when kind of representing the universities and companies abroad through the medium of English, but also looking at the discomfort of realizing the political implications of language teaching. And then through activism and curriculum innovations as a result of that realization, this, I hope, led me to kind of challenging the traditional role of ELT and kind of strive for empowering students as global citizens. In terms of Yvonne's story, Yvonne discussed her journey of becoming a socially aware educator, which was shaped by her experiences of othering and displacement. Growing up in a politically enforced monocultural society, she initially perceived English as a symbol of freedom, but faced challenges and discrimination within the ELT industry. So through dialogue and reflection with us, Yvonne recognized the profound impact of her experiences on her teaching practice, and it embraced a culturally and socially responsible approach to education. And I hope I'm summarizing this well, Yvonne. Perhaps there's a way to discuss this more later in the Q&A section. So Lorraine also offered unique perspectives on her paths to becoming socially just educator, as she reflected on her career trajectory as an educator and kind of realizing the importance of critical self-reflection and dialogue with others. Lorraine particularly acknowledges her limited understanding of historical and geopolitical context, and particularly concerning my and Yvonne's Polish roots and context. But then through sharing stories and experiences, she kind of confronts her own privileges and the impact of fear on kind of engaging in meaningful conversations. And obviously, similarly, Lorraine, I'm sure I'm not kind of going into the depth of what you discussed in your story, but we can perhaps open this up later in the Q&A. So I'll go to the key themes that came out of it. I think that throughout our research, we found the 3 key themes to be essential: the trust, the kind of care in general, and the polyvocality. We kind of realized that creating a collaborative and inclusive space for exploration was paramount as we got into the complexities of striving for more equitable educational spaces within EAP. And then it was no-brainer that collaboration and inclusivity were central to this approach. Our research revealed that the significance of intersectionality in shaping our personal and professional identities was really the key, because the moments of marginalization served as catalysts for prioritizing social justice in our practice and kind of emphasizing the importance of belonging in educational spaces that we were part of. And when analyzing these themes and insights, we embraced this kind of ethics of care throughout our research, where we prioritized the well-being of all of us, which was really, really supportive, I felt. And that kind of included adopting the love ethic, which is very well described by bell hooks. We quoted a lot of bell hooks in our work. And love ethic in this regard would emphasize their kind of interconnectedness and nurturing growth over, domination. Pedagogy of care was also a key theme, which allowed us to reflect on our experiences, and then this allowing us to recognize the importance of extending empathy, compassion, and understanding in our own EAP practice. So Bali's pedagogy of care in particular resonated with us, emphasizing the creation of supportive and inclusive learning environment. So yeah, just to reflect and wrap up, I think our journey towards becoming socially just educators is still ongoing. It's never a complete or kind of limited journey, and it's unique to each of us. And through meaningful dialogue and reflection, we've certainly gained a deep understanding of ourselves, but also each other. And that then strengthened our sense of belonging and fostering accountability and interdependence. So yeah, as we continue our journey, we would like to encourage others to embrace similar approaches in how they collaborate and how they work together, how they embrace creativity, collaboration, and compassion, because I think this is really key to knowledge building. And, that can help us to challenge biases and promote inclusion and work together to create, in general, a more socially just education system. If there's time, at the end, we can talk about how you can produce a blackout poem, if you want to find out and explore this in your own practice. Yeah, thank you. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to chat about it later today.
Okay, thanks, Tomasz. And now, lastly, we have Joe. I think Alex isn't here, so then after Joe, we'll have some questions and answers. Actually, one thing I realized, Joe, as you're about to speak, one of the theorists that you write about, or that you mentioned, Jan MacArthur, I know she'd have been really glad to have heard your talk today. So I probably should have invited her. I'll remember next time. She also wrote a chapter for us. Okay, so Joe.
Wonderful. I hope you can hear me. Yeah.
And I've got your slides ready, Joe, if you need them, or just.
Oh yeah, let me just try. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna try. No, it's telling me to. Oh, okay, one sec. Oh, okay. Yeah, Yvonne, I think I'll ask you.
Yeah, no problem.
Because it tells me to go to settings and whatever else, and it's just going to take longer.
No problem.
If you can open, that'd be great.
I just don't know how to. I don't know how to make it full screen, but apart from that.
Yeah, because there is a few slides kind of hidden, as you can see, because there was not going to be enough time. Yeah, that one, I think that one that you are now on. You just press that one.
Start from the current, yeah.
Should work. Yeah. So first of all, I really just want to say thank you for inviting me here. Thank you for inviting me to write a chapter for this book, and so great to be here back with EAP for Social Justice SIG. I have to say that, you know, being in this SIG for the first couple of years of its existence was part of the inspiration for this very chapter and this very research that's actually reported in this chapter. So it's just amazing and great to hear about your chapters as well. Everyone who spoke already, so Yvonne and Ivona and Lorraine and Tomasz, which is brilliant. And I can't wait to actually sit down over the summer and I think read the entire book back to back, because all I had so far was just the glimpses of your chapters, but not thoroughly. Okay, so not to make it longer, my chapter is about curriculum for change. So it's really about an emerging theoretical framework, curriculum framework, and it's, like I said, it's part what's reported on in the chapter. It's part of a larger study, my PhD study. So just to kind of introduce the context of that very quickly, the PhD study is on the impact of curriculum for social change on the students' views and students' behavior related to social justice, sustainable development, and such. And obviously the first part of that study had to be what is curriculum for change? You know, does it even exist? So what I was doing first was doing a literature review and trying to find a ready-made framework, which I didn't find. So then instead I had to kind of, okay, find some principles and find some constituents of such a curriculum, and then basically just build the framework and then find out if anybody does it and so on. Yvonne, if you can change the slide for me, that'd be great. Yeah, so before I kind of get into the framework, when I say curriculum for change, what I mean is, yeah, back one, but never mind. The curriculum for change is a curriculum that helps students develop as global citizens. It's a curriculum that helps students become global citizens, and that's not to say that they are not global citizens already when they start learning with us, but it's purely a curriculum that would help students kind of to develop further in that direction, if that makes sense, wherever they are in their journey in becoming global citizens. Okay. So like I said, the first part of my research was about trying to establish the nature of curriculum for change. And this was based on the literature review, which you can read about in this very chapter. So like I said, I didn't find the actual ready-made framework. Instead, I found some principles. So as you can see, there is this intention. There are 4 constituents, but the intention is sort of the overarching one. It's a principle that kind of underpins everything else. So number 1, intention. Then the next one would be theory fronted specifically, criticality. Then we've got social change or social justice oriented content. And then something that was quite a surprise for me, engagement with community. So this is something that I found in literature, not EAP literature, not ELT literature as much as the sort of general higher education, learning and teaching in higher education literature. Okay, next slide, please. I will just briefly sort of explain. So this is the framework. Like I said, it's an emerging framework, so it will probably change in the future based on obviously the findings and testing of it and everything. But what you can see in the chapter is this. So like I said, this underpinning intention that sort of connects with everything else. And then we've got criticality, content, and community as those 3 sort of underpinning the intention principles. Next slide, please. So kind of going back to the intention, why first and foremost, why is this intention so important? This is what comes from literature, is that if we say, and this is what we've been saying all along in this SIG as well, you know, if we say that the purpose of higher education curricula is to teach, to transform, to produce disciplinary and interdisciplinary experts who are as well active change makers, the core intention must be to change or to develop students' ways of being, knowing, and doing. And then Fraser says that actually change may be impossible without this explicit pedagogical intention. So when we say intention, it's got to be the intention by the curriculum writer, so whoever's designing the curriculum, whoever is in charge of the curriculum, but also the teacher. Sometimes it's the same person, but sometimes it isn't. And then how explicit they can make that intention to the students when they are actually taught this curriculum. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So after sort of establishing why this intention is so important, then I started thinking, okay, what can those principles then look like in practice in an EAP curriculum, right? So for the intention, what I found, and also what I thought, was these things. So maybe learning outcomes, maybe something that's social change, social justice oriented, or perhaps a very critical debate, or maybe a text evaluation that could be the assessment on the EAP module or program, right? Or maybe the very curriculum design itself, you know, based on a transformative theory, or maybe research-driven curriculum design. So we could think of, I don't know, critical pedagogy, or maybe looking at curriculum as a social practice. So anything that would underpin the very sort of design of the curriculum. So these are the ideas I had about the intention. If you have any, please just pop them in the chat, or we can talk about them later. Next slide, please. Then thinking about criticality, we do quite a lot of that already in EAP in relation to sort of theory-driven criticality. So we do use extensively already systemic functional linguistics, different concepts from that. Here, the example is concept of transitivity, for example. Again, the reading circles that have been found to kind of work really well in relation to criticality underpinned by theory has been, you know, Sebon's academic reading circles. They have been found to work in that context as well. Then we've got the tools from legitimation code theory, LCT, which again have been used quite a lot in the recent years in EAP. So there is a lot that we can kind of bring in here to make this curriculum for change. We can think of debates again, argumentative essays, or maybe interactive presentations as well here. Again, any other ideas, please post them in the chat at any point. Next slide, please. The next principle, so the content is probably the easiest to sort of imagine. So anything that would be language or text or maybe images related to social justice issues, such as, I don't know, gender equality, for example, maybe racial equality or poverty. This could all serve as the content in an EAP module or a program that would be underpinned by this curriculum for change framework. Okay, next slide, please. And then, like I said, the biggest challenge and the biggest surprise for me was this community. How could this community engagement look like in an EAP curriculum? So what I found here, like I said, from the outside of the EAP literature mostly, maybe a research project. It could be, you know, if we are doing posters with our students, it could be a research project, and it could be them going out and investigating local beliefs wherever they are studying, for example, in the UK. Or maybe it could be something that Lucy Watson does, I think, down in this, you know, south coast of England. She has been doing that for a few years already. So taking students outside the seminar room to reflect on physical spaces they and others occupy, and then evaluate those spaces, thinking of why they exist and so on. So maybe that could be that, just getting outside of that classroom, outside of the university campus perhaps. And then another option I found was the reflective photo diary, where basically, again, we send students outside of the classroom and we give them a prompt and we ask them to photograph something, anything related to social justice, anything related to poverty, for example. Then students take those photos and then they have a focus group inside the classroom to discuss the photos. So a few things here, a few ideas here. Again, if you have any later, please share, that would be brilliant. Next slide, please. So this is really what it is, you know, this little chameleon. I thought it would be a good sort of representation of change, possibly. But this is what it is right now. Like I said, again, it's an emerging framework. It will be changing. If I could ask for the next slide, please. So beyond the chapter, of very kind of sneaky peek, you know, and because now I have been able to find someone who has got, you know, who runs curricula underpinned by those four principles. So intention, theory-fronted criticality, content, and then engagement with community, mainly using the photo voice, the photo diary kind of technique. So I've been very lucky to test this framework in 2 different sites, and I'm just about to start analyzing the data. But really what I can share now, it's sort of those 2 quotes from 2 student participants. One said, for example, after learning in this curriculum, I have realized the problem is on my doorstep. And then another one said, I have become less judgmental. So that was part of that impact. Like I said, the framework has been tested in 2 settings and it's worked. It looked like it really has developed students as global citizens to some extent, further to, you know, compared to where they were before. So it's really, really promising, but obviously it needs further development. If I can ask for the next slide. Lovely. So this is just really something, now the chapter is out, I can finally sort of set out and sort of think of setting up a network. So anybody who's interested in finding out, you know, what the testing brought, you know, what are the results, or the next publication on this, or if anybody wants to try it out, test it, critique it, and become part of a small sort of community group to kind of discuss this further at any point, please feel free to join that network. And that's it. And I think just my references at the end. And that's from me. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Right. Thank you, Joel. So I think Alex didn't come, so I guess what we'll do now is we'll take some questions. Let me just see the chat. It's a lot of chat.
Big thank you to all the presenters. It was great. Thank you. I really enjoyed listening.
I think with one question here from Karen. Do you want to ask that, or?
Yes, sure. Hi. My question is for you, Joe. And specifically, I was interested in whether you investigated or found that there's an EDI, equity, diversity, inclusivity theoretical framework that is also relevant to the Curriculum for Change framework that you're developing. And is that an area that you investigated at all and dismissed, or what you may have researched specifically around EDI and theoretical frameworks.
So Karen, thank you so much. Do you mean there is an EDI curriculum framework specifically out there?
Well, I guess what I'm thinking is the universities are talking about EDI as being a fundamental value that we want to develop with our students broadly. And so wondering then if where you might have gone with that,
So
or if it
that was
relevant.
Yeah, that was mainly within the content, the principle. So obviously, like we said, you know, whatever, because that's the thing, you know, with the curriculum for social change, it can be so many different things, right? And even if we call it curriculum for social justice, again, social justice in what? So if anybody, so the idea is that if anyone wants to use this framework and focus on specifically EDI within the, for example, EAP module, let's say, right? Then they can do that, because obviously then EDI concepts coming from all of the literature, there is, you know, about this, not only in EAP, but obviously beyond as well. And right now there's more and more coming. Then that can be used as this specific focus in the content, sort of within the content principle of that framework. And then, so for example, if somebody would focus, and that was actually one of the that was actually the focus on a processional I was teaching a long time ago, which was also, you know, a long time inspiration before. There was a focus on gender equality specifically, and all of the texts that students were studying on that processional were around gender equality. So that was this sort of EDI angle. And then on top of that, obviously, this was then critically evaluated. The text would be critically evaluated by those theories. So the criticality would come in as into, but I think mainly my question here was, because content is sort of obvious. So you think, right, EDI, yes, if I want to focus on that, let's just talk about this. But I guess my question here was kind of deeper and thinking in relation to, is it enough? Is it enough just to talk about this? Is it enough to just have the texts and then critically, for example, analyze them? Is that enough? How far would the change go if we just have the text? Obviously, there will be still some change, and obviously we've got evidence for that. But that would be mainly change in students' thinking. So raising awareness, not necessarily going as far as to sort of changing the behaviors, although, you know, this is why we need testing. But then, so I guess here, yes, to answer your question really briefly, EDI reading was a massive part of obviously of that. But if in terms where it goes into framework, that would mainly the content, and then basically what you do with that EDI content, how it then informs, for example, that intention that I was talking about as well. Is that, I'm not sure I answered your question, Karen. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's really very interesting. And the distinction you make between changes thinking versus changes behavior is something I'm going to think more about in my work. Thank you.
If no one's got any other questions, I had one for Joe, and it's great to see you again. I was wondering about, because when we did the reading together on social justice, and we're trying to kind of figure out initially, you know, where would social justice sit in EAP and what it would be, and from the reading that we've done on that early project, there seemed to be sort of two pathways. The content, as here sort of defined as kind of EDI content, but the second one was sort of pedagogy. And I was thinking, looking at your framework, that element of, so do you talk about sort of the curriculum writer, but you quite rightly point out that it is the teacher who enacts that in the classroom, and you can put fantastic fantastic content to put together a course, and there could still be teachers who would just not deliver it if they don't believe this to be, or if they don't invest in that. So So I was just thinking that in that framework, I'm missing the delivery part of it and the pedagogy and how the teacher sort of enacts that. I was just wondering about that aspect.
Thanks for the question, Ivana. It's yeah, I was thinking long and hard, you know, and then I finally decided, you know what, actually it's this intention for me. At this point, it's really, and like I said, bringing it to light, and obviously that's something that the chapter talks about as well. It's really this intention on whoever is there with the students, but also whoever is behind what's happening in that classroom with the students. So this is why, because I think, you know, pedagogy would be another this underpinning thing, because you could have all the content you want and all of the criticality you want and all of the public engagement you want, but like you just said, if you've got someone in the classroom who does not believe that, for example, social justice, there isn't place for social justice in the EAP classroom, that it's not our job, and so on, then they will not be having that intention, and the intention actually is going to be opposite, you know, although it might be, you know, part of that hidden curriculum in that case. And that's also part of the thinking in relation to, okay, students' behaviors versus students thinking, what are we changing, how, you know, to what extent, and so on. So for the pedagogy part, yes, and that would be that underpinning intention in this current sort of framework as it is now. But like I said, now I've got the data. It's great, it's fascinating. Now obviously the development will go further, thinking, right, how, because I still don't know how much of the criticality, right, how much of the content, how much of the public, does it have to be a specific thing, what really changed people's behaviors more than something else. So it's going to be sort of now combining it with, okay, how it needs to be situated in the curriculum and obviously in the pedagogy. It has to work together. There is no other way, really, I think, from what I found so far. Does it answer your question? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because I remember our early discussions about that, and we were always wondering, sort of, the question in the early days was, if somebody's sort of enacting say culturally responsive pedagogy, but does not have an intention of doing a social justice. Do you have to call it social justice to do social justice? We had that discussion early on, and it's a really interesting one, and I quite like the intention, because it does have a lot inside it. It's quite a lot of content can go into that if you've got an intention of change, if you've got an intention of creating an impact and change for your student, then perhaps that's a great starting point. And as you say, that's in your framework, it's underpinning everything else, that you do need to want to do something with it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, so much has changed, because I first started, you know, that in 2020, really, you know, the idea was maybe in 2019. Now we are sort of almost 5 years later. And I was talking to someone else last year about this, and it was so important at the start of my PhD to justify and to explain why it's so important to kind of research that kind of thing. Why even think of curriculum for change, or why even measure its impact? Why talk about social justice in the EPA classroom? And now you hardly have to justify that to anyone, really. It's becoming sort of normalized, if not the practice, at least the need for it. So, and I guess, you know, by the time it's developed further and so on, it's probably going to be more changes, I wonder. Can I ask a question to Yvonne? Would that be all right? I don't know. So I'm sorry, I'm not looking at that.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. We've got time.
Yeah, Yvonne, I was wondering, I was thinking about your context, specifically your teaching context, and then I was thinking about our both sort of chapters kind of merging, and thinking of your context and my context in this framework. And I was wondering, you said you've got really challenging context there. Well, for you, of course, as a teacher, but then for your students, right? And I'm wondering whether this kind of curriculum framework has any standing, or is it too much, or it's already, I would imagine it's already happening to a large extent in your classes, but yeah.
Yes, I think it is already happening. I guess my focus was more on the practical aspects. You know, that's sort of more what we're dealing with every day, is like trying to. I mean, there's a lot to do in terms of curriculum development and materials development, but the everyday sort of firefighting is seeing which students are struggling with their internet connections. Can our local partners help them? Can we find them somewhere else to study? Those are the sort of things that we're managing on a day-to-day basis, I guess.
I was just thinking that would be really interesting to kind of see what impact it's got on the students. Obviously, that you do things in certain way in the classroom, obviously in those specific contexts, but that's perhaps another conversation. But thank you so much for sharing your work on that so far.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is encourage the students to talk about their contexts, as you know, if they can do that safely online. That's another huge consideration.
Yeah.
That we have, but one of the things, one of the aims is to get them to discuss their contexts and compare their different contexts.
But also, how safe is it even for them to talk about any sort of change or social justice? That was my other kind of thinking when you were talking today, right? Because it's one thing to test this kind of curriculum in the UK with international students, and I guess it would be a completely different thing to try and do it in your context.
Yeah, it's the online component. So we do things like we never record lessons, and students who are absent and who have connectivity problems want classes to be recorded, but we just never do that because it's a safety aspect, and I think it's something the student doesn't necessarily occur to them, even though they're living in those situations.
Alex?
Thank you. Yeah, Alex.
Hi. Yeah, so first of all, thank you to all of the speakers for sharing your research. Yeah, I'm definitely going to, I don't know why I haven't gone out and got the book yet. It's on the to-do list, but now I definitely will. I have a question for Yvonne as well. I was just wondering, like, whether there were any kind of support systems in place for the teachers who were kind of dealing with students who are going through, you know, difficult situations and who might be in kind of precarious situations in terms of personal safety, and who might not be there the next day, you know, who might be harmed or even killed in a conflict zone. So, I mean, because, you know, like I've been doing some workshops, delivering workshops on trauma-informed pedagogy, but that's kind of assuming that teachers are teaching people who have been through a traumatic experience and who are now in a relatively safe place. But this is something kind of one step removed from that. So I was just wondering, like, what your experience has been of like what kind of support teachers need and what they might have been able to receive.
In my current context, there isn't anything at all, really, and I think there's a desperate need to. I mean, we can, when we orientate new teachers to our programs, our courses, our students, of course, we give some background, but I don't feel qualified to do that, and we don't have anyone specifically to do that. When I worked overseas, specifically when I was in Jordan, we were working a lot on the camps, the refugee camps for Syrians. We did have somebody who specialised in trauma-informed pedagogy. I don't know if you've heard of Mary Delaney. I've quoted her quite a lot in my chapter. I found her inspirational, and she worked a lot with the teachers who were going on with me and the teachers who were going on to the camps. And yeah, I found her really, really helpful, really supportive, and gave us some really good pointers for how to deal with different situations. but I one of my main arguments is that it was great and it was really helpful, but it wasn't enough. And again, the academic considerations were given more importance. So there was some, but yeah, not enough.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess that probably concludes the book launch section. If anyone wants to get the book in your library, I should have put up a link. I can put that in the chat just as we go back to the closing of the AGM.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Paul, and thanks again everybody who's shared their research. It is really a fabulous book. Obviously, I'm slightly biased, but it really is a really, really great collection of authors, a really wide span of contexts and continents, as Paul has said. So would strongly recommend you to lobby your library to get it in on their shelves. So I think that brings our AGM and the book launch to a close. Thank you so much for sticking with us for all of the time. Really appreciate it. As we've said, if you're interested in what we're doing, please reach out, please get in touch. You know, you don't have to join the committee to get involved and propose an idea of something that we can take forward. But unless there's anything else, Yvonne, can you think?
No, I think I'm just going to stop the recording now.
Fabulous.
Just to finish it. Thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks everyone. Have a great rest